Good morning. One of the perils of speaking second is that the person before you steals quite a lot of the content that you have, but that's fine. I think you'll find that I'm in violent agreement with Graham, so some of the points that he's made I will make again. That just reinforces it, and you can just look at the fantastic view out of the window at those bits if you like. So good morning. Some of you will have expected to see Chandru Dissanayake speaking this morning, and the astute among you will have noticed that I am not him. And Chandru sends his apologies, but his loss is really my gain. I am Lindsay Lewis. I'm the Interim Deputy Director for Residence Industry in MHCLG's Building Safety portfolio. And I'm particularly pleased to be here today because I personally have been involved in some of the work that Working Group 12, looking at construction products, has been doing. So it's really, really good for me to see how this work has come together as a whole through the Raising the Bar report. And it's absolutely fantastic to see so many of you here this morning. I understand that this is a sellout event. And it's really great to see so much engagement in this really important agenda to make sure that people are safe in their homes, that they feel safe, and that a tragedy like the Grenfell Tower fire never happens again. So thank you all very much for coming. So it's now 2 years since the Grenfell Tower fire, and as Graham mentioned, the findings of the first phase of the public inquiry, looking at what happened on the night of the fire, will be published soon at the end of this month. So now I think is a really good opportunity to look back on what we have done so far to respond. And you know, like collectively, we've done a huge amount. So in government, we set up the public inquiry. We established an expert panel to advise government on fire safety risk in buildings. We identified ACM-clad residential buildings over 18 metres. We ensured the safety of those buildings through immediate mitigation measures and longer-term remediation measures. We commissioned Dame Judith Hackett to carry out an independent review. We made £400 million available to the social sector to help them remediate ACM cladding in their buildings. We also launched a £200 million fund to accelerate replacement of ACM cladding on private sector buildings. We also introduced a ban on combustible cladding for residential buildings over 18 metres. We published our consultation back in June on proposals to make long-term reforms to the regulation of high-risk residential buildings. We launched a consultation on requirements for sprinklers and other safety measures in new high-rise blocks of flats, and the list goes over the page. We established the Joint Regulators Group to develop and pilot new approaches to the regulatory system. We established a new protection board to provide expert consistent inspections for high-rise buildings. We carried out an investigation into fire doors, and we commissioned further research to understand the fire performance of non-ACM cladding. So that's quite a lot of stuff, but I'm really proud to say that industry has also stepped up. You have worked with us on the industry response group. Dame Judith has chaired the industry safety steering group, and industry representatives have been generous with their time and have been prepared to account for their actions at those meetings. And as has been mentioned, Dame Judith does not pull any punches, and those of you who have been involved will know that it's not an easy ride to go and appear in that meeting, so we really appreciate that people have been willing to do that. And then, of course, many of you in this room have given up your time to participate in the competence working groups because you know that the way the industry operates now just isn't good enough and needs to change, and the Raising the Bar report reflects the bringing together of all that hard work. But we all know that there's more that needs to be done. So cladding has been replaced on 114 buildings. Work has begun on a further 120, and plans are in place to remediate a further 165 buildings. But we're aware of 22 buildings where plans for remediation aren't clear, and that just isn't good enough. And our Secretary of State has made it clear that there are no more excuses for further remediation delays, and any building owner who doesn't have a clear plan for remediation by the end of this month will face consequences for their inaction, including being named and shamed. In the consultation for our long-term reforms, we set out our plans for the new regime for high-risk residential buildings, including proposing new duty holder roles, requiring them to demonstrate competence and employ competent people, and making duty holders clearly responsible for managing safety risks. And we will respond to the consultation in the autumn, and the government, as has been mentioned, confirmed its intention to bring forward legislation to implement the new regulatory regime in the Queen's speech this week. So this change is coming. We believe that this will create the stronger oversight and support the culture change we badly need to fix the system. But if those reforms are going to work, it is absolutely critical that industry support and step up to the challenge of becoming more competent. And we need you to start now. And I'm sure that you recognise that this is a really big challenge, and you've put in a huge amount of work to get this far and to develop the recommendations in the Raising the Bar report. But I have to tell you, that was the easy part. Now we really need you to work with us to make it happen. We have so many engaged people in the room, which is fantastic. But what about everyone else? How are you going to bring them with you? Legislation and a new regulator will take time to happen. But what are you going to do to make the system better and your people more competent today? I know that this is hard. It's always hard to change and to move away from the things that you've always done. When I speak to industry colleagues, they will frequently tell me about buildings where they think fire stopping hasn't been done properly, or where products are being sold that don't meet the right standards. But they seem reluctant to call this out, to report it, to say this is wrong, this is not acceptable. But that is what we're asking you to do. Building competence means developing knowledge and skills and experience, but it also means getting the right behaviours and that integrity, not doing a substandard job and not letting others do it either. And if you're thinking, I'm tired, or it's late, or I'm not making any money on this job, I can completely understand that. But I do ask you to reflect on what the consequences might be. People's lives depend on what you do and how you do it, and I want to give you some reflections on what that means for residents. So I came to work on the Grenfell Response Project in August 2017, so about 6 weeks after the fire. And I wasn't working initially on building issues. I was working with Kensington and Chelsea Council to make sure that they were rehousing the survivors from the tower. And so I went to the Grenfell site because I wanted to understand better what had happened and the people that I was trying to help rehouse. And some things I had expected. I had expected to see the silent, dark, burnt-out shell of the building. But at that point, although we now know that 72 people died as a result of that fire, at that time, still 6 weeks after the fire, we didn't know that. And the streets around Grenfell were covered with yellow ribbons and scores of posters with photographs on them and the line, missing. Have you seen my sister? Have you seen my uncle? Have you seen my brother? Have you seen my mother? Again and again and again. So it is not only that the families of Grenfell lost their loved ones, but they didn't know what had happened to them for weeks. And they also lost their homes and their possessions. What do you do when you've lost your family members, but also your identification, your passport, your insurance documents, your bank card, family photos, everything? One young girl went to sit her GCSEs the next day in her pyjamas. That is what she escaped wearing, and that is all she had. Over the weeks, the coroner identified the victims, and many could only be identified by their dental records or even their DNA. I sat alongside colleagues at work who were taking long and distressing calls from survivors. I read the public inquiry evidence that found that alongside flammable cladding, Grenfell Tower's smoke extraction system was not in line with approved document B, the firefighting lift could not be operated properly, and later we discovered that the fire doors did not comply with regulations through the police inquiry. And I read the evidence from firefighters, first of their horror and confusion when, having put out the fridge fire inside flat 16, they realised that the building was still alight. And then the testimony of firefighters who went into the tower to rescue people and who thought they would never come out alive. And then I had to stop following the public inquiry because crying at work is frowned upon. And I realised that this is really grim, unpleasant stuff, and it is very tempting to forget it. But I think it shows why what you do really matters and why I'm asking you not to forget. I have heard some people say that Grenfell, while it was a catastrophe, was a one-off, and anything on that scale is unlikely to happen again. Well, Edward Daffin, who lived in the tower and who warned that it wasn't safe before the tower, doesn't agree. He says, Grenfell 2 is in the post unless you act, and quickly. Is that fair? Is he justified in that? Well, we have identified over 400 buildings with unsafe ACM cladding. The Nacanal House fire spread via flammable cladding and killed 6 people. So not on the same scale as Grenfell, but bad enough. And as Graham mentioned, we've seen a number of recent fires where fire has spread between flats, including in Barking and Worcester Park, and thankfully no one was killed, but families have lost their homes and their possessions. So I don't think we can be confident that this was a one-off, and we can't allow Grenfell 2 to happen. So I'm asking you to continue to work alongside us in government. It is going to take time. If anyone would like to be part of a joint team within government, I would be really interested to hear from you, so please get in touch. We know that industry can do this. As again was mentioned, the industry was challenged to improve its health and safety record, and it responded. It took time, but it succeeded. So I believe that you can do this again. So you are going to get the chance to ask me some questions in a minute, but I want to get in first and reiterate my question for earlier on. So when you leave here today, what are you personally going to do to make the change in your industry happen? What do you need to do to build the knowledge, skills, experience and behaviours now? How will you make sure that Grenfell 2 is not in the post? Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Graham Fieldhouse. I'm a fire safety consultant, particularly in respects of risk assessments. I also did an interim role as head of fire safety for Southwark Council after Lacknell, so I went in and I know an awful lot about what happened at Lacknell, and with a lot of what we said. Did a lot of the TV interviews following the Grenfell fire as well. I sat with Sir Ken on one of the action groups. The thing that worries me is there's a lot of talk at the moment in the industry, particularly for the risk assessors, about being part of a third-party organisation, and there's lots of them out there checking risk assessments, from anything from me sending 2 of my risk assessments in, paying my fee and getting stamped up, to having an interview about the British standards. Isn't it time that we had one group, non-for-profit, that people, so that the standard of risk assessors, I've audited thousands of risk assessments by people who are on third-party groups, some of them, and the quality is so poor in some of them that we need a consistent line, and I think one organisation should be set up for risk assessors to be a part of, and then you can have standards for those who are doing residential properties to commercial properties, and you can also make those then have people underneath them to train them up, because you go and do your NEBOSH, and next day you go and do a building like this. Well, technically you can, but competency? No, not a chance.
Very good point. Very good point. Lindsay, do you want to kick off with that one? I think we do see some of that emerging in the regulatory group.
Well, I'll take it first. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. I mean, as will be apparent from what I said, I'm a bit of a Johnny-come-lately to the fire safety sector, a sector which over the last 2 years I've come to have an immense regard for. I think it's true to say, and there are others in the audience who know more about this than me, that the Fire Safety Federation did at one point, long before Grenfell, propose and set up a model for a single council for fire risk assessors, but for reasons not certain to me, that never happened. But I do hope, and I agree with you absolutely, that there needs to be one standard that is clearly applied, and that building owners and managers understand what they are getting, because we all have come to see the situation in terms of different levels of fire risk assessments and different ways of appointing a fire risk assessor and different fees for that job. And there is clearly a bit of a race to the bottom in some areas in terms of getting the cheapest assessment done. And I know that's not what my colleagues in the fire safety sector want. They want to see an established benchmark at the right level with one registration council. So I certainly, pledge myself to help make that happen.
Absolutely. So I think that's the industry response, but I think also there's the formulation of a government response in terms of the new regulatory system. No? Right. So, so I think as part of the response to the Hackett reforms, we have a new system being designed and a new overarching regulatory body. And so therefore part of this equation is let's get everybody in industry properly doing the right thing, but let's have no doubts that if you don't do the right thing, there will be some authority that will actually take action. And I think that is part of the plan.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm talking for you now.
No, that's fine. Yes. So you're quite right that that part of our proposals is a plan for an oversight body to make sure that competence is carried out. But I'm really interested to hear what you're saying, and it's great to hear industry representatives coming up and sort of proposing and saying what needs to happen. I guess I have a question back to you, that what's stopping you doing it? What is the barrier to this, and can you take that forward if you think that is what needs to happen?
Well, I have had with Chandra, and I think I actually even had emails from yourself. It's just that we seem to be in this position where there's lots of people who are putting proposals forward for different groups, and I know there's a lot of third-party registration going on at the moment, and that's the problem. That there are too many organisations setting up their own independent third-party registration, UCAS accredited for this and different ones, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there just needs to be one, because unless you get one organisation managing it, you are going to have different standards and different approaches. And when the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Disorder was first written, it wasn't really intended for residential. It was more for the commercial, and the government direction at the time was for it not to have a formal group that you had to be linked to. We've seen that grow from Lacknall to where we are with Grenfell. We've seen that change, and we need to change. We're not changing with it. And a lot of people, I've had a big argument with Lewisham Council recently, HMOs. They were trying to imply that you had to be a third party registered to carry out a risk assessment on an HMO. You don't. In fact, the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order makes it illegal for them to do that. And they've backed down from that position. So we just need to have that, and I'm more than happy to work with you on getting that done. I have looked at so many risk assessments, and I can tell you the quality is so poor still now.
Right, thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to come back to that later in the day. There's one over there, Dennis.
Thank you. It was really to carry that on and just to finish it off as well, I hope, because this afternoon that's exactly what we're going to be discussing, and in fact there is work going ahead right now. I'm Dennis Davis from the Fire Sector Federation, and there is work going on and has been for a year of doing exactly what you're talking about. Maybe this afternoon we can explore that a bit more.
Fabulous. And then I think one behind Alan, yes?
Yeah, Alan Hurdle from the Smoke Control Association. It's a question really for Lindsay, because I applaud all the sort of working groups that are happening, and you've mentioned what's going on regarding cladding and the sprinklers, etc. But the thing that I still keep pushing is about smoke control. We know that's one of the greatest causes of death, but when I look into all the different reports, etc., I don't see something that effectively is looking at smoke control per se, and it'd be interesting to talk to you after, really, Lindsay, about and who do I need to talk to ensure the right profile is raised in this very, very vital area.
Okay, yes, I'd be very happy to talk to you afterwards. It's not my specialist subject, but I know some people for who it is, so let's talk. Great, thank you.
Right.
Paul Everall, Chief Executive of LABC, Local Authority Building Control. I just wanted to challenge one thing that Graham said. Before Grenfell, he and others in the construction industry didn't take much interest in fire safety. Certainly all the time I've been in LABC, and in my time as a former deputy director responsible for building regulations, Part B of the building regulations was a key element and one which was constantly under review. It is difficult to get change to the regulations very frequently, but every time there was a native fire, we did look carefully at what lessons could be learnt. And of course, the Ministry has already taken action following Grenfell in terms of certain things. And as an organisation, we were members of the Fire Sector Federation long before Grenfell actually happened. So there were good links between in the past between certainly our part of the construction industry and colleagues in the fire safety side. I think it's unfair to say that really it wasn't taking much interest before Grenfell. And clearly, as I'm sure the inquiry will find, that there are many things, other additional things which need to be changed. And I'm very glad that the work which has been done through this Raising the Bar group has brought the industry more widely together with the fire sector. But we were working with them for many years now. Thank you.
Great, thank
Can I
you.
just respond to that?
By all means,
because I'm not doubting at all what Paul says. I mean, what I said was obviously deliberately personal. I was talking about my personal experience. I was talking about meetings that I had both as a chief executive of CIC or involved in other professional bodies. I've no doubt that on the building regulations side there were, much wider connections. But, I rarely met people from the fire safety sector. That's my personal situation. So, and I think a lot of people in the construction professions would probably recognise that too if they examine, that past history themselves. It's a different context, I think.
I think that's amplifying just what a diverse and complicated industry we all belong to. I think that's the challenge. Everybody's got a slightly different experience. Okay, any more questions, please?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Malcolm Sarsted from the Institution of Engineering and Technology. My question really is, what can we learn from other industries? I think there is a danger that perhaps we look too inwardly at this particular sector, which I must admit is not an area where I'm competent, but what can we learn from outside? So, for example, another anniversary I was thinking of when you mentioned the 40 years in October, I was thinking actually of the 14th of October 1913. And the 14th October 1913 was the Singenit colliery disaster. And there were 439 people that died. They were trapped underground because the one escape route was blocked by a mine explosion. So there was no alternative escape for the people underground. And since the public inquiry was after the First World War, and since about 1919 or 1920, it's been a law that every mine has 2 escape routes. So for me, when I think of tall buildings, they are mines in the sky. So it's just a shame, perhaps, that we don't kind of look more broadly outside what we've learned in other industries and what lessons we can take on board.
Thank you. I think we have had a general focus on what's going on around the world. We've looked at other industries as well, particularly oil and gas, and certainly with engineering as well. And certainly in Scott's considerations, that's been taken account of. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that's a really, really interesting point. I think that, as you say, we've tried to learn from other industries. That Judith Hackett has particularly pointed towards chemicals, the offshore oil and gas industry, nuclear, and I know there are some representatives who have experience in the nuclear industry in the audience. But I think that is another potential area to draw on. So and the more learning that we can do, the better.
Thank you. Andrew Bulmer, Institute of Residential Property Management. We've got 5,000 members who manage residential buildings, and notwithstanding the earnest comments from the floor over there, my members are now starting to do invasive investigations of buildings, and we're finding that well over half of them have serious failings in fire compartmentation. The elephant in the room is that we have a legacy of at least 20 years of really poor construction, which does not necessarily tally with as-built plans. So I think we need to have that understanding when we are making our plans going forward.
Thank you. Yeah. Any comments from anybody?
No, just to say that, I mean, shocking though that is, that's information that we discuss all the time at the industry response group, and obviously remediating those buildings is a part of this huge issue that we all have to deal with.
I'm really pleased to hear that your members are starting to do this. I have a concern that sometimes I think people are afraid to look because of what they might find. But we need to look and we need to understand the risks. So it's great to hear that is going on.
My name's Keith Simpson from the National Housing Academy, representing social housing landlords and property services directors that manage those properties. I'll just give you a few facts to contemplate. The first one was my colleague and I went to see the regulator of social housing and asked the regulator, what do you do to ensure competency within a landlord, of which we've got 2,000 housing associations, 400 local authorities. He said the only thing that we look at is financial competency. To which we responded, well, killing 72 people in Grenfell, if it is 72, and I don't think we'll ever know the real number, is fine, as long as you're financially competent to rehouse everybody and pay the compensation, but do whatever you do. Now that is a dreadful statistic, in fact. The other thing is that we've done skills assessment on experienced and qualified trade staff, 550 of them, and 52% are incompetent. Now they've got the cards, they've got the passports, they've got the qualifications, but they can't do the job. And we're really concerned that so important is Hackett that we're desperate for it to be implemented and mean something. And our view is that we've not yet defined competence. And that's an issue for everybody, to come up with a proper definition of competence, because it clearly is not experience and qualification. Our view is competence includes measuring people in the work environment and building a portfolio of evidence to say they are competent because they've undertaken this work successfully and it's been checked. The other thing that we found, at the request of our members, I'm also chair of the Direct Works Forum, which is lots and hundreds of landlords in the social housing sector. And they requested that we create some training courses on fitting fire doors. So we created 4, one for fitting, one for repairing, one for maintaining, one for inspecting. We've trained 200 carpenters and surveyors, and not to this day, and we booked up until next June, every day training fire doors. We've not yet found a joiner that can fit a fire door correctly. It's not an exaggeration. We found joiners that use plastic packers around the frame. We found the wrong foam being used. We found digital locks on fire doors. The whole thing is like the Wild West out there. And this represents an opportunity for the sector to get hold of it. I'm despondent at the fact that the social housing sector, which does all this refurbishment throughout these existing tower blocks, we're not more involved in this. I'm not surprised, because the social housing sector's never taken technical issues seriously. It's been a housing management function for them. We've only got, I think, 6 chief executives in 2,000 housing associations that have got a technical background. So why would they know about compartmentalisation and fire and danger? Most people are finance directors who are looking how much money they can accrue, or housing management people that have gone through the ranks. Very few technical people are running housing organisations whose primarily responsibility it is to build houses and maintain them, which is a bit of a question for us all to answer why. So my major point that I just want to get across is that I'm desperately concerned about Hackett
concentrating so much on personal competency. Because my view and our view within the Academy is that this will not get off the ground if you continue doing what you've always done. And we've always had these card systems and passports and qualifications. That's not good enough. What we've got to do is to create organisational competency, where the organisation takes responsibility for what it's managing. And that goes from the board understanding their responsibility, and 99% of the boards don't understand what they do in the Housing Association, not exaggeration, right through to the exec team, right down to the operatives. And it's a huge challenge, but this is a phenomenal opportunity if we get our act together. And we all work together, share best practice, and have days like this. But it's going to take more days like this spread across the country to get people involved who've got really serious things to contribute from their experience of managing high-rise buildings. And my view is, honestly, Hackett's recommendations and all those principles have got to be spread out right across social housing. There's 343 people killed in housing last year. Only 72 of them was at Grenfell. The rest were in timber frame housing and all the garbage that house builders are putting up these days. So I'm really pleased I've been here today because I'm looking forward to the content, and I've written to Graham without response, and I'm sorry to do that publicly, Graham, but I wanted to talk to you because we want to be on the competency steering group. We've got things to offer. We've got computer systems, we've got digitalisation that we can bring to this, and we'd like to get involved with it.
Right, fabulous. Thank you very much. And probably I should say that we did spend an awful lot of time talking about what does competence mean and where's it got to go. And I hope that when we see the other presentations, you'll get some real confidence that actually we've addressed not all of your issues, but quite a lot of them. So, and I just want to give Graham a quick chance to comment.
Well, I was going to say that contribution was like deja vu to me because it summarised hours and hours and hours of discussion that we've had at the Competence Steering Group. First of all, I'm sorry if I haven't responded to you. I will look into that. Secondly, on the question of definition of competence, there is an attempt to define what we mean by competence and the principles of what competence is in the report. I can tell you that we had 11 versions of that before we finally agreed on one. But what we want you to do, Keith, amongst other things, is look at that and tell us where you think we've got it wrong. Yeah. Because that's the whole point of this exercise. So please, look at what we've said is the definition of competence spread across the working groups and tell us where it can be improved or where we've got it wrong.